Okay. All right. I'm going to start. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to Dialogue with Deidre. I'm your host, Deidre Malone, and I am so glad to have an opportunity to sit down and interview the author of Sex and Surrender, An Addict's Journey, and then The 4 Steps, A.D. Burke. Welcome to Dialogue with Deidre.
Thank you so much, Deidre, for having me.
Talk to me a little bit about what made you want to write these 2 books.
Well, it wasn't I wanted to, it was sort of a calling. I grew up in a Christian environment, and I believe that we're all here for a purpose. And I was a former sex addict, and God gave me a dream one night, and it was like, okay, how are you going to get out of this, and how are you going to help other people dealing with this? So that was sort of the impetus of writing Sex and Surrender, An Addict's Journey. And then from that, I would do interviews on the book, and everybody was like, well, I understand you had a 4-step process for breaking addiction. We need to know that. So then I came up with the 4 steps, a practical guide for breaking the addictive cycle, which is sort of like an alternative to the 12 steps program. And I think given that you have a lot of millennials who think 12 steps is too daunting, it's a great book. Also, sometimes people are triggered in 12-step meetings, whereas this is an individual workbook that you can work through yourself and maybe with a counselor.
So how did you know you were a sex addict?
It's funny because I didn't have what typical is any addiction. You usually have like that tipping point where, okay, I need to get help.
Right.
I didn't get fired from a job.
Right.
I didn't almost lose my life. I didn't catch a fatal illness that would say you're an addict. What it was is I always knew I wanted a family. Mm-hmm. And I knew the behavior I was exhibiting would lead to me accomplishing that. So that was at the point I knew I needed to get some help.
So Eddie, talk about your background. I mean, you were raised in primarily a single family parent home, right?
Yes.
Religion was
Yes.
paramount. That was important.
Right, because my grandfather was a Baptist minister.
Oh, wow.
In the Bible Belt, Tennessee.
Gosh, in Tennessee.
Yes.
I'm telling you, so your journey was such. Mom stressed education.
Yes.
Granddad was a Baptist minister. Mm-hmm. So how did you get to realize that there was an addiction?
Once realizing I wasn't going to get the family, because the family I wanted, but I wasn't able to verbalize, was with another man.
Okay.
And homosexuality, of course, in the Christian church is you're a sin, you're going to hell. So that internal conflict of not being able to reconcile sexuality and spirituality, along with the issues of abandonment from my father at 4, although he was in and out of my life, but the abandonment issues that we deal with in childhood permeate into adulthood until we can get to the root of it. And that, as well as people pleasing my mom, because she had sacrificed so much for me, I felt obligated to make her happy, which happy meant me marrying a woman, having kids, and moving forward, but that didn't work. So I'm in pain.
Right. And so how old were you when you realized, I've got to really be true to myself?
I think it was around 28 when I was in grad school at Rice getting my MBA.
Okay.
And I knew, I was like, okay, you're almost 30. This timeline of yours, because that's I guess the issue with being quote unquote successful.
Right.
Everything's on a timeline. And my timeline wasn't working, and I knew the behavior I was exhibiting, it wasn't going to lead me to. So I knew I got to get some help.
So 28.
28.
So getting help meant counseling.
Correct. And my first time through was a total disaster. Luckily, I was working at an oil and gas company at the time, which paid for counseling, but I went to a certified sex addiction therapist who thought I was bipolar. I said, okay, I know sort of the highs and lows of bipolar. And then again, my mother was a licensed professional counselor, so I'm used to being experienced around mental health. Mm-hmm. So when it's time for him to make his diagnosis, he's like, well, you're not bipolar. I was like, yeah, I knew that. So I had to leave. But luckily I had, and that's step 4 of the 4 steps, creating a support network. Luckily I had a great support network, and my mentor, he basically said, look, I have another psychologist I would recommend you going to. And so I went and met her, and I was like, okay, let me throw everything in the kitchen sink and see, what she does. And she was like, okay, so you use intelligence as a defense mechanism. I'm going to need you to help me help you. And that was the process of healing.
A lot of black men would not take that step
Yes.
to go to counseling.
Mental health in the black community is frowned upon. Matter of fact, I remember my dad saying, "Oh, you don't need to go to all that counseling and stuff." And actually, one of the things that we mentioned before was abandonment. And what I ended up doing was writing a letter because I was like, "Well, maybe he'll come." She said, "You got to go on his track record. He may not come, but you need your healing." So I ended up writing an 11-point letter. It was 11 bullet points. I'm resentful for X, Y, Z, all those 11 things, and I mailed it to him. And his initial approach to the discussion of the letter I spent was, well, this point here isn't true. So I said, okay, well, let's take out that one point and discuss the other 10.
Right.
And then he said, I'm sorry. And at that point, I was done because you have now validated my childhood experience. I know you did the best you could given where you came from. I can move on. Abandonment gone. Now let's deal with the other issues and move forward.
So at 28, you realized that you really didn't have an addiction.
I did have an addiction.
You did?
Because how I define addiction is anything you utilize to escape pain.
Okay,
And
so
I
you
was
did
using
sex as an addiction.
Exactly. So what would happen is I would find someone that I felt was just the most attractive, have sex with them, but of course it's empty because there's no spiritual connection.
No
People don't
emotional.
realize, exactly. People don't realize sex is very intimate and from a spiritual standpoint.
Wow. So how long did that behavior exist?
12 years.
12
Basically 12
years.
years I was going in and out because when you really look at it and you're able to assess, okay, back then that's behavior. And luckily on my website I have a sexandsurrender.com. There's under a tab called Helpful Tools, and I have what it call a sex test, and it gives you 13 questions to assess whether you or someone you know may be potentially a sex addict. Because the reality is, a lot of times we're dealing with sex addicts and we don't know it, and we're trying to figure out what's wrong with the relationship. Well, they're really not in a healthy place to be in a relationship.
So, Sex and Surrender, an addict's journey. Was this your way of trying to help others, or was it therapeutic for you?
It was both. There's obviously, it's a cathartic process of writing, but I knew more importantly, as I told you with that initial dream, God was like, how are you going to get out and help others to do it? Because I look at all the information I had to read, research, a lot of people wouldn't do it.
Yeah. Wow. And then the 4 steps. Walk me through the 4 steps.
The 4 steps is, to me, I think the real reason why I end up having to go through everything I did, because ultimately all of us are dealing with pain of some sort, a lot from childhood. I don't know if you're familiar with attachment theory, but basically from attachment theory, only 95% of the population is dealing with an attachment issue. So only 5% of the population grow up with no attachment issues. And so basically 95% of the people need help with addictions and some sort. And so the 4 steps is a simple process in terms of 1, 2, 3, 4, but a very intense process, because to go through the 4 steps, step 1, establish or reestablish your own relationship with God. Well, addictions are very self-centered. So to do that, you have to step out of self and go to higher power. Whatever religion is irrelevant. Spirituality is who you are and with the Creator. So I don't care if you're Muslim, Buddhist, Jewish, Hindi, whatever. So that's the first step. Once you go through that process of answering questions that get you to think about your relationship with God, then you can go on to step 2, which is abstinence. And abstinence, people are like, oh, so you should never have sex again? No, that's not abstinence. I consider abstinence to the point of you understanding what your addiction is doing to you and others. So sometimes they say only go 90 days and that's the abstinence period. For me, it was 1.5 years. You know, it was understanding me having sex with another individual, there's a tie here, and then what am I utilizing for? Is it to really connect to this person, or is it to escape the pain of me dealing with abandonment, me dealing with all these other issues? So step 2 is abstinence until you get to the understanding of what this particular addiction is doing to you. Step 3 then is walking away from your triggers and changing your environment. Because what happens as addicts, what we do, we establish our own world to keep feeding the addiction, and we put up those walls because of fear. So step 3 is assessing your environment, understanding what those triggers are, and then changing it to be a more healthy place.
Okay.
And the final step, creating a support network. Because everybody it shouldn't be in your inner circle, especially if you've been an addict, because you have old friends that
They
are
might
fellow
be a
addicts.
trigger, right?
Absolutely. Old friends can be triggers, and not even intentionally. You know, some will want to help you. Oh yeah, you need to go, but then they say, well, let's go over here. Well, that was where y'all used to hang out all the time, but you
Right.
can't do that because you know it's going to trigger you. So I outlined in step 4 the characteristics of individuals who should be in your support network. Someone who's not an addict, someone who is confident enough in themselves to say, I don't have to be there for you to hold your hand. I can be there from the phone and say, hey, we've been through enough together. You know better. Look how far you've come. And sometimes it's something that simple, just knowing you're not alone. Because ultimately, we're all looking for love.
That's right. So, AD, before we wrap up this segment of the show, what would you like to leave our viewers with?
A couple messages.
Yes.
First one, addiction is equal to pain. And no matter what you utilize as an addiction, just realize it's based in pain. And you've got to get to the root cause. For the sex addicts out there, realize sex is not equal to love.
Right.
True love is unconditional, and there's nothing anyone can do or say that loves you to make you stop loving you. They don't have to accept bad behavior, but the true love is unconditional. You don't have to beg for it. It comes naturally, and we've already been giving it to it.
And if somebody wants to buy the books, one of the books or
Right.
both of the books, where do they go to do that?
So you can go to www.sexsurrender.com to get Sex and Surrender, and then you can go to www.4stepsguide.com. And under each website, there's a book tab, and I put the first chapter for free, as well as on this www.4stepsguide.com. You can go under there and get the first chapter as well as the first step 1 question.
So, Eddie, let me ask you this final question. Are you available to do speaking engagements about the book?
Yes, I'm actually trying to do workshops for the 4 steps because the reality is 12 steps isn't working for everyone. And so you need an alternative that can sort of get people in the right direction at least. And then we can always do follow-up interviews as well.
And so, viewers, what we'll do is we will make sure that we put those websites and information where you can contact AD Burks yourself if you want to have him come for a workshop or a seminar or just to, buy some books. So thank you so much, AD, for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.